It was being called the most complex business environment since World War II. Global supply chains were stretched to their breaking point, trade wars were escalating, and one of America's most iconic companies found itself at the center of a storm. Boeing, a symbol of innovation, aviation, and national pride, was suddenly fighting battles on multiple fronts. The trouble began quietly, in boardrooms and negotiation calls, but it didn't stay there for long. When China, one of Boeing's biggest customers, abruptly halted deliveries, alarms rang out across the aviation world. At the same time, the U.S. president threatened tariffs so severe they could cripple the company's domestic business overnight. For Boeing's leadership, the situation wasn't just about lost contracts or political maneuvering, it was about survival. And at the center of this high-stakes drama stood three key players: the U.S. president, determined to project strength; Boeing's embattled CEO, forced to defend every decision; and the company itself, caught between being America's proudest manufacturer and a global enterprise under siege. But what triggered this explosive clash between government, business, and global markets? Well, let's find out. To answer that, we need to go back to the decision that lit the fuse. The spark came from a single announcement. Boeing revealed plans to shift part of its manufacturing operations to Mexico, a move framed as a necessity to cut costs and remain competitive against Airbus, its European rival. To Boeing's leadership, it was a strategic adjustment, but to Washington, it was a declaration of war. Within hours, the backlash exploded. Politicians called it a betrayal. Commentators framed it as proof that American corporations were abandoning their own workers. And then came the thunder from the top. The U.S. president, furious over the decision, threatened Boeing with tariffs of up to 200%. For a company that relied on its domestic market as a foundation, that number wasn't just a penalty. It was an existential threat. Behind the outrage was something deeper. Boeing wasn't just any company. It was the crown jewel of American aerospace, a trusted defense contractor, and a brand synonymous with U.S. dominance in the skies. If Boeing shifted critical work abroad, it wasn't just about jobs leaving the country. It was about national identity, political control, and who really held power in the modern global economy. Almost overnight, what was meant to be a calculated business decision had escalated into a political firestorm. And while the public debate grew louder, the real turning point was happening behind closed doors, in a private exchange that would decide Boeing's next move. The public saw the headlines, angry speeches, tariff threats, and late-night debates on cable news. But what they didn't see was the quiet, tense phone call between Boeing's CEO and the President of the United States. According to those close to the situation, the exchange wasn't a polite negotiation. It was a clash of two worlds: political power against corporate strategy. On one end of the line, the president demanded that Boeing reverse its decision immediately, warning of severe consequences if the company defied him. On the other, Boeing's CEO stood firm, insisting that the move was essential for survival in an unforgiving global market. What made this call so pivotal wasn't just the words spoken, but the silence that followed. No agreements were made, no compromises reached. Instead, both sides walked away convinced they were right and unwilling to back down. Publicly, the president doubled down, promising to make Boeing an example. But privately, insiders suggested the company had already accepted a different reality. The days of being protected, simply because it was too American to fail, were over. Boeing would now have to fight on its own terms. This private standoff marked the true turning point. It wasn't just a dispute over factories or tariffs anymore. It was a showdown over who controlled the future of one of the world's most important companies. And from that moment forward, the conflict only grew more explosive. Because Boeing wasn't preparing to retreat. It was preparing to confront. Boeing could have backed down. It could have quietly reversed course, moved a few jobs back to the United States, and waited for the headlines to fade. But instead, the company chose confrontation. In a bold public statement, Boeing's CEO defended the Mexico decision, calling it a necessary step to ensure long-term competitiveness. He reminded everyone that Airbus, Boeing's fiercest rival, was already thriving in a globalized production network. If Boeing didn't adapt, it risked losing the race for the skies entirely. The response from Washington was immediate and furious. The president renewed threats of a 200% tariff, declaring that Boeing was abandoning American workers. Lawmakers lined up behind him, sensing political opportunity in attacking a corporate giant. To them, Boeing's defiance wasn't just an economic issue, it was a test of national loyalty. Suddenly, the conflict had transformed into something larger than Boeing itself. It became a proxy war between two visions of America's future. One rooted in global competition, supply chains, and efficiency. The other in protectionism, tariffs, and political control. And with both sides refusing to blink, the world was about to feel the shockwaves. Because while the United States tried to corner Boeing at home, another powerful player was already making moves abroad. Just as Washington tried to tighten the screws, Beijing delivered a shock of its own. Almost overnight, China halted deliveries of Boeing aircraft, grounding deals worth billions. For a company already under siege at home, losing access to its fastest-growing market was, well, devastating. But China didn't stop there. Reports suggested that new tariffs were being prepared, aimed directly at the aviation sector. Airlines that had once been loyal Boeing customers began to hedge their bets, turning to Airbus for future orders. The ripple effect spread quickly. Suppliers faced canceled contracts, American workers feared layoffs, and global airlines braced for delays. In Seattle and Wichita, where Boeing's factories had fueled local economies for decades, the mood turned grim. Entire communities depended on the flow of parts, contracts, and steady paychecks. Now they were watching the geopolitical chess match threaten their livelihoods. Markets responded in kind. Boeing's stock wavered, investors panicked, and analysts warned that the company was staring at a perfect storm. Political hostility at home, trade retaliation abroad, and a shrinking pool of safe ground to stand on. Yet in the middle of this storm, Boeing's leadership saw an opportunity. If America and China were both turning hostile, perhaps it was time to look elsewhere, to markets less entangled in political rivalry. And so quietly, a new strategy began to take shape. While the political battles raged, Boeing's leadership began redrawing its global map. If the United States and China were becoming battlegrounds, the company would search for safer ground in places hungry for growth. Asia, outside of China, was exploding with demand. Airlines in India, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia were ordering fleets to serve a rising middle class eager to travel. At the same time, Latin America was opening new corridors of connectivity, with carriers expanding routes across the continent. Boeing saw both regions not as side markets, but as lifelines. Executives framed it as a bold pivot. Instead of relying on Washington's approval or Beijing's cooperation, Boeing would position itself as indispensable to emerging economies. Deals were signed, partnerships forged, and factories retooled to feed this new wave of demand. In the short term, the strategy worked. Deliveries ticked upward, revenues stabilized, and for a moment it seemed as if Boeing had outmaneuvered its political adversaries. The message was clear. The company could still thrive without bowing to the pressures of nationalism. But the victory was fragile. Beneath the numbers, cracks were forming. Safety controversies still haunted the company, and honestly, whispers of technical failures refused to die down. And then another crisis, this time one of trust, was waiting in the wings. Even as revenues rebounded, Boeing just couldn't escape the ghosts of its past. The name 737 MAX still carried a weight that no press release could erase. After two tragic crashes and a worldwide grounding, public confidence in Boeing's engineering had been shaken to its core. Regulators demanded answers, airlines demanded assurances, and passengers wondered if they could ever trust the company's planes again. And the problems didn't stop there. In recent years, reports of mid-air incidents involving Boeing jets resurfaced, each one reigniting questions about quality control. For an industry where safety is non-negotiable, even a single mistake could undo decades of trust. Then came the company's ambitious space program, a venture meant to showcase Boeing's future beyond aviation. But the Starliner project stumbled. Launches were delayed, systems failed tests, and headlines once again turned critical. Instead of proving Boeing's technological dominance, the setbacks painted a picture of a company struggling to meet its own promises. Inside Boeing's boardrooms, the challenge was clear. This wasn't just about tariffs or trade wars anymore. It was about credibility. Without trust, from regulators, from airlines, from passengers, no amount of new markets or political maneuvering could secure Boeing's long-term future. And that's what made the next stage of this story even more important. Because Boeing's fight wasn't just about itself anymore. It was about the future of every global company caught between governments, markets, and the unforgiving court of public opinion. Boeing's crisis was no longer just Boeing's problem. It had become a case study in what it means to be a global corporation in an age of rising nationalism. The dilemma was simple but brutal. Could a company still call itself American while moving factories abroad, relying on international supply chains, and chasing customers in foreign markets? Or was it destined to become a target, punished at home for being too global, and punished abroad for being too American? Other giants were watching closely. Apple, Tesla, Ford, all companies deeply tied to both United States identity and global sales, understood the stakes. If Boeing could be brought to its knees by political pressure and trade wars, so could they. Suddenly, the boardrooms of Silicon Valley and Detroit were filled with the same questions. How much independence does a corporation truly have when governments decide to tighten their grip? Boeing's fight, then, wasn't just about airplanes. It was about the balance of power between nations and corporations. It was about whether efficiency and global reach could survive in a world where politics demanded loyalty above all else. And in many ways, Boeing became the test case. Because if one of America's most iconic companies could be cornered, forced to choose between national allegiance and global survival, what hope did anyone else have? The stakes had grown far beyond aviation. This was about the future of capitalism itself. The question now is not just whether Boeing can survive, but what it will look like if it does. On one side, the demand for aviation has never been higher. Emerging economies are opening their skies, middle classes around the world are traveling more than ever, and the future of air travel promises decades of growth. For Boeing, that should mean opportunity. Yet opportunity comes with pressure. Regulators and passengers are demanding safer, greener, more sustainable aircraft. Airlines want lower costs but also higher efficiency. Governments want to see their own industries prioritized. On the other side, Boeing must grapple with its identity. Can it still call itself America's flagship manufacturer while relying on a global network to survive? Can it balance loyalty to its home country with the reality that its future customers may live in Asia, Latin America, and Africa? Every decision carries political weight, and every misstep risks headlines that could shake investor confidence overnight. The company's path forward will depend on more than planes and profits. It will depend on transparency, credibility, and its ability to rebuild trust, not only with governments, but with the public that flies its aircraft every single day. Because in the skies, reputation is everything. And in the decade ahead, Boeing's reputation will be tested like never before. For more than a century, Boeing has stood as a symbol of American ingenuity. Its aircraft carried soldiers into battle, connected continents, and made the world smaller. It was more than just a company. It was a national icon. But in today's world, icons don't stand untouched. Boeing is no longer just America's company. It is a global enterprise pulled between governments, markets, and the unforgiving scrutiny of public trust. Its story is no longer about jets or factories. It is about the collision of politics and capitalism, nationalism and globalization, survival and identity. The decisions Boeing makes now, where to build, whom to serve, how to rebuild trust, will shape not just its own destiny, but the future of every multinational corporation facing the same impossible questions. And in that sense, Boeing is more than a company under pressure. It is a mirror reflecting the world we live in, divided, interconnected, and uncertain about what comes next. The skies are still calling, and the demand for aviation will only grow. But whether Boeing rises to meet that future as America's proudest manufacturer or as a global survivor fighting for relevance remains to be seen, and that's the story we'll be watching unfold. If you want to follow how it all plays out, stay with us, because this is only the beginning.